right now.
So I given this at a Twin Cities Division Clinic and at the Chicagoland RPM, so a few of you might have seen this in the past. With that, I modeled the parts of the Wilmer Division, a little different areas than Joel Weeks. What I do is model the area, the Osseo line coming up from Monticello up into St. Cloud, and then the line to Wilmer, going through Waite Park, Rockville, Cold Spring, and other towns, but I stopped just before Paynesville. I also model a portion of the NPGN joint line coming up the east side of the Mississippi River. So we're talking about modeling the town of Rockville right here. Rockville got its name because of all of the granite quarries in the area. And basically this whole stretch in here is built on a bed of very high quality granite, and Cold Spring Granite Company in Cold Spring is now the largest granite company in the world. This is shows a track plan of the overall layout to kind of put things in relation. So the St. Cloud Yard is here, comes through Rice Junction where the line splits that heads off to Fargo and up north, through Waite Park, then Rockville. From Rockville, it passes to Cold Spring, two-turn helix, and then into Richmond, and then staging. If you notice, Rockville is in a prominent position. It's right at the foot of the stairs when you come downstairs. So it is one of the first things that people see, and it is on the upper level. This is actually multi-level layout. There's at least two layouts, and as many as 3 or 4 in places. So yeah, so this area has 2.5 levels. So when I started designing and building the layout, I was looking for prototype information, and I was able to find a few things. The Stearns County History Museum has been a good resource, and there's an aerial photo here taken in about 1935. And by blowing it up, I was actually able to get a better view of what was going on. Here you could see the 2-story depot and the stock pen that was in town, and this kind of got me excited. It looked like an interesting town to model. Looking at the other parts of town, you could see the Trestle Bridge over the Mill Creek, the church and the grain elevator. The other thing that was unique is, it's hard to see here, but you'll see is there's the, well, you could see the spur coming off the main line here. It actually goes through the gas station parking lot, crosses the street, and pulls into the grain elevator. And then I found a couple other interesting photos there, the Rockville Depot, and then a steam-powered train passing over the Trestle crossing Mill Creek. And I also there found a map, one of the railroad station maps that showed the area. It was nice that, additional information, like it let me know, the bridge location, how many spans it was, where the grade crossings were, how wide they were, and even what signs were along the track. Also, more importantly, anywhere there are industries, it tells when the spurs were built or what the name of the industry was at the time. And if you find a later map, as the industry names change, well, here even says that, the person that first owned the mill now changed, it went from the Neater's spur to the Farm Supply Company spur in 1929. So these were updated over time. And then this showed the area here. Not only was the stock pen there, but there was an oil station, oil tank from the local gas station here along the line on the house track, the depot, and then the quarry. So with this information, I basically started to, I was designing the layout, and I designed the town of Rockville. So we have the house track, the pass siding, the main line, the spur that was going to the quarry, and then the spur track to the grain elevator. Subsequently, when I started actually building the layout, I found that I didn't have nearly enough space in here for the structures and the street and the main line. So I actually ended up having to bump out this section of the layout a little farther just to give a little more space for that scene. Like I said, this is what you see as you come down the steps. Actually behind it and and climbing up over it is the staging for the Dakota division. So this simulates all the westward traffic. So one of the things that got going on the layout as I started about 95, 96 was that in 1999, the National NMRA convention came to the Twin Cities. And sometime in early 1998, I volunteered to be on the layout tours. As Joel says in his earlier talk, that kind of motivates you to get going. Being in the Twin Cities, I ended up having the NMRA tours and the layout design SIG tours come through, and we had 400 people come through in 2 days. So makes it interesting when the neighbors see a full-size bus pull in front of your house, unload, and every 30 minutes another bus comes in. But I really want to get some scenery in, so this is one of the areas I focused on. If you remember in the original photos, there was kind of a hill behind Rockville, and so I simulated that by just putting ground foam on a thin layer of actually styrofoam. And the reason I did that was behind this hill, you could actually pull these sections off where the switch machines that controlled the staging yard behind it, so it gave me access. And for the time period, for the 1990s, this was state of the art. Ground foam, trees, backdrops. We had hand painted. I was an engineer, not an artist, so I'd never be able to paint a backdrop. But kind of state of the art for the time. This shows actually the Maselter Oil Company, based on the dimensions from the GN map and from some photos. I built this using a Campbell tank, actually a Campbell and loading shed, and then scratch built a few of the other parts. I took one of the classic Model Works oil tank trucks and just used dry transfer letters to letter it for the oil company. And so that was one of the first industries I put in the area. It was just a small little oil dealer that periodically get a tank car of oil. Well, shortly after that, I discovered, actually you can see this was printed out in 2008. Doug Compla, a good friend, was working at the archives at Jackson Street. And we downloaded a list of all the AFEs for Rockville. And I started learning things, but some of the things were things I kind of wish I didn't know, because I thought some of the interesting things I thought I'd model didn't exist in my time frame. For instance, in 1947, they removed the stock pin. So that was now gone, no more stock pin. At about the same time, I discovered a book in the late 1980s, 1990s, a lot of the towns in this area had reached their centennial, and local residents would get together and a lot of times publish a book. And Rockville, as small as the town was, there's a book about 8.5 by 11 by about an inch thick. And that had a lot of information, a lot of photos of the industries and other things. And there I learned that in 1953, a freight train had derailed, and some of the cars hit the depot and it caught on fire and burned down. So there went my opportunity to model a nice 2-story depot, because I modeled the fall of 1956. And then I realized that 53 was the last year the local passenger train ran through, so they had no reason to bother rebuilding the depot. So, two of the things that first got me interested went away, but by this time I was too far down the path. I also found this, the Minnesota DNR. If you go on their website, every dot on this map is a place where they took an aerial photo from. And the different colors indicate different years. And you can download these, and from these photos, it's really easy to see how towns changed over the years. And so here's another place I learned quite a bit. For instance, this is 1938. You can see this is the church, you can see from the shadow, and the grain elevator or the feed mill is here. You can see the large pond. There was a mill pond here. They put a dam for the water-powered mill, and there's a large pond behind here. You can see then that the creek flowing here to the Sauk River. Now, if we look by 1951, getting close to my time period, that's all gone. It's filled in. So by that point, they weren't using the water power anymore. And so even the landscape changed. But from here, what some of the things I picked up was, with the church, here was a road, one of the main roads that headed out, actually heads to other towns crossing the Sauk River. Wanted to include that. You can see the rail line coming in. You can see at this point, the spur track coming through. The grain elevator is actually expanded from what it was in the earlier photos. And then here's the Mill Creek coming through, joining the river. The other thing here is here's where the depot was, and there is a dirt road heading back here going to the team track area. So these are all things that I thought would be interesting to model over time. Also started looking through more of the archives at the GNRHS archives at Jackson Street. And here's a photo I found showing in '63, where again, the depot was gone, but there was a gantry crane to help to load granite from the quarries. If you look closely, what's interesting is there's actually, from the crane, they're actually running the cable to the end of the car and using the crane to move the cars forward as they load them. And this is actually just basically a small phone shed. But the AFEs also told me that after the depot burned, they put up one of their small standard steel depots. And in the archives, we actually have drawings of these depots and a list of what other stations, other locations had this depot. And while there weren't any photos of the one in Rockville, we do have photos of the same type of depot in Leicester, Iowa. So with the photo and the drawings, I was able to scratch build a structure, a model of the depot. By fact, the drawings even tell you what colors they painted things at the time. These are actually made out of sections of steel bolted together, and to simulate that, I just basically used pieces of styrene, slightly sanded the corners and glued them together. So just like in the prototype where it's the bent, you see slight radiuses so you can see where each of the boards ends. A lesson learned here. They had screen over the windows, and I bought some very fine, actually a kit for a screen door, and use the screen here. And they tell you to, when you're done, use a black permanent marker to color the screen black, which is what I did. Permanent marker isn't permanent when sprayed with alcohol. Right after I put this nice depot in place, I was working on scenery, wetted it down with alcohol, and had all the ink run off the screen over the entire model. So I was back to square one again. Actually, I was able to, with alcohol, wash it off, but I had to redo all of the screens again. So remember, if you use alcohol with your scenery, don't use permanent marker. So by 2012, this is what Rockville looked like. I had the crane, the depot, and scenery in this portion of the layout. Like I say, I was never really satisfied with the backdrops and some of the scenery. Not being an artist, I was looking for another way around. And by that point, I bought some sample Scenic King backdrops. And so I thought I'd give it a try. The other thing is, you see, this whole end of the town is empty. And I kept leaving that for the future because I'd have to cut open the benchwork to put in the creek and scratch build a lot of structures. So that was always for the future. So here's one of the backdrops I bought from Scenic King, and it was called Along the Creek. And I thought this could work well. In the background, you have a hill covered with trees. There's a creek. Unfortunately, it was running in the wrong direction. It was, running in towards the front, and my scene will be running backwards. But I just scanned in all the sections into Photoshop, flipped around the image. Then I had to actually extend it. For instance, see this short stretch of trees here, I had a lot longer stretch to cover, so I just used Photoshop to duplicate and extend that to a larger area. And then I wanted taller hills, so I put another level of trees behind it. But this is what I turned the backdrop into. The beauty of this is I don't print it out anything special. I just print it out in regular legal size paper on my printer. So I was able to just put thin cardstock behind this, tape it over the openings for the switch machines. If I ever have to do any maintenance, I can just cut it open and then just reglue another piece of paper right over it. But to me, this totally changed how the scene looked, made it much more realistic. And this got me motivated So then I started working with the new products available, all the static grasses. So instead of ground foam, using static grass. And that's what led to this. So that same scene that we saw before, which pretty much stopped abruptly behind the tanks, now looks like it goes off for quite a long ways. So this is by 2015, this is where I got the layout to. Same time frame, Walters re-released their Team Track kit, and this crane was very similar to the one in the photos. So that's when I added, or just before this time frame, I added this crane in. So now we had something kind of simulating that one photo with the older wooden station and the Team Track with the crane to load up granite. This is about the time when I was told that the Twin Cities was going to host the National Narrow Gauge Convention in 2018. And I was asked if I'd open up my layout to some layout tours. So even though it wasn't narrow gauge, they wanted to have some of the standard gauge layouts in the area featured. So I said, okay, but I decided that this would be the motivation to finish off the entire upper level. So when people came down the steps, they'd see a completely finished section of layout, which meant I had to deal with the entire far left corner in the town of Rockville. So I got motivated, and I really started in December of 2017. So I start off simple, and that's to start off with the dam and the creek. And as I mentioned, that book on Rockville had a lot of photos, including, well, here's a couple of them. I also found other photos on the Stearns County website. And so based on these photos, I've just developed some sketches and built, the back of the dam and the raceway coming out. And all I did was used some basswood as the frame, and then Chooch makes stone. Basically, it's a rubberized product with adhesive backs, with stone on it. So I cut that out and stuck it onto the surfaces. And then from the photos, and like I say, I had additional photos, you can see that they actually put a layer of concrete over the top. So I just used actually sheetrock mud across the top and painted and weathered it. So at least we had the start. And at the same time, we cut open the layout and put in supports for the riverbed and strengthen the bench work, but cut out an opening from the Middle Creek from the front all the way to the back of the layout. Highway 23 passed over a bridge. Initially, it was stone, but then in the early 50s, they widened the highway, so they put in a concrete bridge. The bridge is still there. We took some photos of it in the early 80s. See, initially this area is wide open, but by the 50s, the gas station alongside here had expanded, and they put in basically a retaining wall made of granite stones left over from the local quarries. So that was, the next step was again using, Chooch products to put in a kind of the retaining wall, and then the bridge itself was just cut out of styrene with layers, adding layers of styrene to match the photos. And then the railing is from Central Valley. So by this point, I feel like, hey, maybe I can do this. To me, it was always the water and the trestle and the bridges that were kind of the more daunting task. So I decided to go to the next step and build the trestle bridge. So this is a photo of it from the 30s. We actually went and took a series of pictures in the 90s, actually early 2000s. The bridge was still there, to get a better feel for the details of how the bridge was built. Then using the information from the GN list of bridges, which list overall dimensions, how many bents it was, how far they were spaced apart. And also years ago, Model Railroader used to have this blue book of model railroad practices, and they'd give prototype information. There was a really good issue on wooden trestles, which basically went through saying for, depending on the size of the bridge and the weight class, what the size would be of the various cross members. And then I measured out a few things. So from between the photos and what was in this article and what I'd measured, I developed sketches that showed basically what the construction of the bridge was, and made a list of all the different size timbers I'd need and put in a large order for scale lumber. While I was waiting for that, I built 2 jigs, one to hold all of the stringers in place while the deck was glued on, because this was a ballasted deck trestle. A second to build the trestles. So one of the things I did in here was I designed it so there was room for a saw blade and a razor saw to cut across. So instead of trying to sand or cut each individual pile, you just put them into the fixture, and then you could cut across the top, and all of them would be cut at the proper angles. Then I'd glue cross piece in the braces, and then again cut across the bottom. So then they're designed to be slightly taller so that in the end, once the deck was done, I put the deck in, attached the track to it, then clamped it to the bottom of a level, and then would sand each of the trestle bents, just whatever it took, so they just slid in and supported the bridge well. And with that, we had it completed. Well, actually, trestle just had to ballast the track and add some scenery. So now it's time to start looking at some of the buildings. This building was the Rockville Creamery. And actually, if you look at the 40s, it had been abandoned. It was entirely covered with ivy and overgrown with trees. What started here ended up covering the whole building. But in the early 50s, Al Maselter, remember, that was one of the names that was on, that was the name on that oil dealer. One of the kids started a cabinet shop. And so they converted this building into both their house on the upper level and the cabinet shop in the basement. And so the book had some photos of it, and I used these photos to lay out a set of sketches of the main components of the building. Now, one of the problems is when you have a photo like this, distances get distorted. So, it's the perspective. So you can't just measure along a wall like this and get the right distances. But if you use geometry, for instance, if you draw an X in a square, the center, it marks the center of the wall. Well, the same holds true in a case like this. So if you draw a line between the 2 diagonals, where they cross is the center of the building. Now, once you've got that, you can divide into another center. And so now you divide the quarters, and you'll see that this distance here is much shorter than this distance here. But by breaking it up that way, you can break into smaller segments and get accurate measurements even on walls that you haven't taken a photo of square on. So for this building, I didn't want to scratch build everything, so I found some titchy windows that were at least close and laid out the walls based around them. It was a stucco building, so that was my next issue was, what do you use for stucco? But it ends up Plaster has a number of different textures, and they actually sell something that simulates stucco and styrene, so you can just glue it on to the main core of the building. So I ended up with this by trying to figure out how to make the letters that kind of label it for the cabinet shop. And my daughter got one of those little Cricut machines, and she was able to cut vinyl letters, press on letters that used to letter the building. So some of the things that I ended up needing to do is, for instance, prominent on all the sides were these little vents. So what I try to look for is what are the kind of signature items that stand out. And since in my time frame those were painted, they really stood out. I just used plastic clapboard siding for the louvers and a little styrene around the outside. Some of these windows are fairly uniquely shaped, but again, I used titchy windows on the ends and then just styrene strips kind of match the structure. These were groups, tissue windows cut apart and put back together. The door is actually, garage door was scratch built to get something the right size and shape. But in the end, it gives a pretty good impression of the building without a huge amount of effort. So now we are kind of finished, kind of at least hit the structures toward the back of the layout. That was started to look at, okay, what do I do for the rest of the town? And I was able to find a few photos in the book. This was looking down the street, and you could see the church, the elevator mill building. Actually, this is the Maselter gas station in their house. Looking from this view from 61, again, here's the gas station, the elevator, and you can see even from here to here, the elevator was covered in wood. Here it's covered with corrugated siding. And again, there's another shed added on right here, and entirely different building added on here. Here's actually that Maselter Cabinets is right here. And here's that spur, another gas station, and that road we talked about. So I started working on the scenery. Here's that road we talked about that headed back. And if you remember, it did, after cross the track, go around the corner, which was nice because that allowed me to hide the end of the road behind some trees. This is the gas station parking lot for the gas station where the siding went through, and then the church would be over here. This is where I ran into a little difficulty trying to figure out what to do for the street down here, because I really wanted to match up the scene. Well, here's where I went to the internet, and I created a backdrop using Google Earth Pro. I know people have used Google Earth before, and what they do is bring it up on the screen and take a screenshot, because Google Earth doesn't really give you a way of saving the data. But Google Earth Pro is a higher end version of Google Earth, and it's a free download. If you get Google Earth Pro, it allows you to save high resolution images of what you're finding. One trick is there's a lot of extra menus and things on the screen that can affect, interfere with your image. So if you go into the menus on Google Earth Pro and on navigation, you can shut things off. So things like this writing, the compasses, other things that normally clutter up the screen go away. So it gives you a much better image to work with. So also, instead of taking a screenshot, there's actually a save option, save image, and you can pick the resolution you're looking at. And again, there's several options, the scaling. Now, the one thing I found was that they've taken photos at different time frames. Even these small towns, Google's gone through more than once. And the older photos have a lower resolution than newer photos. So as you're going down the street, it switches from one image to another, but you may notice at times where it's a little sharper, a little clearer. And what I found is it's key to get a newer image with the higher resolution, because the older ones, by the time you blow it up for a backdrop, don't necessarily look so good. But what I was able to do was get a series of images, and you can actually tilt the angle you're looking at. So I could get some of the, because for instance, this was hidden behind parts of the church which have been modernized, but by going down slightly looking to the left, I could get a better view of the house. And I took a whole series of images and then used Photoshop elements and combined them into one longer image that would cover the whole wall. For instance, remember there was that roadway going here. So I went down that roadway and looked to the left to get pictures of this, of the garage and the rest of the house. Then the only other thing I had to do was there was a couple cars there and a couple signs that were too modern, but with Photoshop, it's easy to just eliminate those things. So I took out anything that didn't look right for the 1950s. And actually the houses don't really look that different. And so that's how we created a backdrop that matches the street. Oh, that's the other thing with Photoshop. I could widen it and erase it so I got a better perspective, and the width of the street just matched exactly to the width of the roadway on the layout. So for, sometimes procrastination helps. I've been thinking for years, or well, how am I going to scratch build this church? I mean, there's just a lot of detail and a lot of work. Couple things that were kind of intriguing was this church had a fairly tall foundation and these large windows lighting up the basement. Because of that, there was a large, kind of steel platform at the door and steel steps going up. At the same time, underneath here, there were steps going down to the entrance into the basement. So underneath the the main church doors were the doors into the church basement. I thought that was, one of the signature things about this church. Let's even talk about it. Notice basement door under front steps and then open stairs going up here. Well, about that time, Walters came up with this kit. And actually the full-size church would have been probably a bit big to fit in my scene. This one's a little smaller, but it had much of the same thing. Now, it didn't have the extra set of, the two sets of windows here, well, or the two windows here, just a single one. But it did have, doors, the windows, very similar windows are outside, similar, structure. Even the trim in here looked fairly similar. So I decided that would be more than close enough. In fact, even the steeples had very similar architecture. So I started with this kit. First thing I had to do was I wanted to get that raised foundation. There were no windows quite the right size, but Tichy did have windows that were 2x3 panes, and I basically would cut them apart and turn them into 2x2 windows. And then again, I used the Chooch stone and made a foundation underneath the church. Actually, I'd even had to go, even lower yet to the very front where the front door was, because that was even below ground. So as a matter of fact, you can see in here, I had to cut out a section in the layout for the front door to go in. Then Tichy also makes a series of casting or molded parts for making industrial platforms of various types. So I bought some of that material, just evergreen I-beams and columns. And then I think Campbell makes stair stringers, and using those parts in Central Valley railings, I was able to put together the stairs coming to the front of the church. And then here you can see the concrete steps that led down to the basement. So with that, we were able to get a fairly reasonable model of the church. I want to point out one little thing, because you'll hear about it later. Remember, the church has this nice cross on top. And this is a standing joke to my friends every time they come over. At this stage, the cross was on the church. Well, my workbench is underneath a portion of the layout. And when I was doing some of I think I was weathering the roof after this, somehow I managed to bump that top against the bottom of the bench work, and that cross went flying. And I have cleaned the workbench more than once. And was it 3 years later, that cross is still not to be found and not on the church. So one of these days, or if we come by, we'll add a cross there, but just one of those things where, and again, lesson learned, don't add the detail parts till it's ready to go on the layout, because the handling, they break off. So this is, again, found a bunch of photos of Al Maselter's gas station from different time periods. When it started off as just this small little Phillips 66 dealer. But the unique thing, and you'll see a lot of gas stations, Woodland Scenics makes a model of one of these. But this one was covered with like a fake stone veneer. This is the time period I'm interested in, because I'm modeling 1956. And actually, you can see at that time period, they were selling Skilly gasoline. But this photo doesn't show it, but by the 1950s, they'd add an extension with the gas station. And even this is just a couple of years ago, it's now a used car dealership. So I had the, actually, these are Sanborn insurance maps, which are another great source for prototype information because the overall dimensions are accurate. So from this, I knew the overall dimensions of the key parts of the building. Using the photos, I was able to develop a drawing of the key components of the structure. And then again, what were the key parts in my time frame? There was actually an open garage door, like here. I want to simulate this garage door. I mean, it was the roofs, the structure, the windows with the trim. In my time period, it was stone colored, not the white that was later painted. And above the door, there was this interesting vent here. So these are all things I wanted to do. Again, here, the modern days, there was 2 restrooms. In my time period, there's just a single restroom in the back, which showed up on these drawings. The other interesting thing is these drawings show 2 above ground storage tanks, fuel storage tanks. So again, start scratch building in styrene. Again, went to Plastruct because they have plastic that looks like this stone veneer. So once the main walls were cut out, I covered the building with the stone veneer. The windows, there's only actually one door that I was able to use a stock, untouched door. Every other window, there was nothing quite the right size. So again, I found windows or doors that were close, then cut them up into pieces and re-glued them to get the right size doors and windows for the structure. It shows up here again. The shingle is actually Northeastern. Here you can see Northeastern makes, shingle strips, but you can buy them already pre-assembled. So all you have to do is cut it to size and glue it down. Here I actually had to glue 2 doors together to get something wide enough and then drill and file the openings. And then I scratch built this, just putting a frame out of styrene and then just little slats glued in. But these to me gave me the overall image. The other thing that really showed up in the photos of the sign, and the beauty is that there's a lot of people out there that collect petroleum gas, things for gas stations. And so there's a lot of photos of period signs available on the internet. So I downloaded that, sized in Photoshop, and then used styrene to make a sign, and then created a cheap gasoline for a sign, the good old days, using Microsoft Word. And so that's kind of the resulting gas station. Installed it. Again, you can get nice period gas pumps, and then because of all of the advertising things available, you can actually very easily decorate them for the company you want, including the artwork for the globes on the top. So I got a little carried away with this one, that they sell. These are the JNL Innovative Design. I actually drilled a little hole and put a little styrene door for the gas pump, and I didn't have them at the time, but now there's a guy pumping the gasoline, and then kind of weather the parking lot with oil and grease stains. There was the Neater's gas station was built in 27. There's a small structure. Then you can see in the 40s, they added a little restaurant next door. By my time period, it was a Deep Rock gas station, and that was a bait shop attached to the gas station. That's still there. It doesn't look the same because they put another roof on it, but this is still the same main structure with just some additional roofs over it. So again, based on the Sanborn maps here, sketched out, again, using the geometry, got all the key dimensions. This was stucco, so I knew Plastruct made stucco. They had tile along the bottoms, and I wasn't sure what to do until I found some O-scale brick, and the O-scale brick made nice large tiles for an HO scale structure. So again, cut it out of styrene, sheathed it with the Plastruct stucco or brick. This case, there were tissue windows just the right size. Then again, what stands out, they decorated with these little cutouts, rectangles and squares. So again, just cut that out of styrene and glued them on. You can see to get ones that look good, I probably made 3 times as many and then just pick the best ones to glue down. While it's easier to get things for a Skelly dealership, Deep Rock, you can't find a lot of stuff on. So again, I found signs like this on the internet. People sell these for people, that are, collect gas pumps. So I was able to find appropriate signage for the gas station. And then again, we have the above ground gas tanks that showed up on the Sanborn maps. And then this again, I found photos of people selling Deep Rock signs and used those in Photoshop to make the Deep Rock sign. Now that left me with was probably the biggest challenge or big building was the mill. And I've found a series of photos, and we saw this one before, but the mill grew over time. So 1909 is just this basic structure. And knowing this made it easier to kind of design it because while it was a complex shape at the end, it was started off with simple rectangles and squares, and it just kept adding more squares to it. So by this point, they're kind of an L-shaped building. You see an addition was made. I think that was 1916 with the church in the background. Again, the large mill pond. See, by this point, the elevator portion was added on top. In 1934, you had a large section, the old main mill, the other section was extended. So you basically had things going in 3 different directions. And then in the 50s, they added this shed to store feed, and it was covered with insole brick. This is one of these things where my wife's uncle and aunt have a cabin about 20 miles between Richmond and Rockville, about 15 miles past here. And we used to drive by this several times a year. And I always said, next time I'll take the photo. Well, in 1990, it was all torn down. I never did get the photos. So unfortunately, I've had to try to figure everything out from these historical photos. So if you see something, take the photo. But even this photo helped because I could see where various doors were that were hidden before they tore it down. So I started off with the separate, the addition, and Clever Brothers actually makes, I tried 2 things with the products here. One of them is they make cinder block. It just actually photos taken of and printed on paper, but it gives you a very realistic cinder block look. But they also make insole brick sheets. And so I tried to do that. So basically I just made a overall structure out of wood and then glued the material onto here. Now, I'm a guy, and we know most guys don't read directions, right? We always know what we're doing. And read the directions. I went through and I cut out this material and I glued it on and things. I was having a tough time, it was a little slippery getting to stick. And it wasn't until I had to cut out a section for something that I realized that, and my pieces were kind of thick, they're thicker than I want, so it's harder to cover the ends. The material comes with adhesive backing. I was gluing on the material and its backing, and it's actually much easier to use. So again, if I'd read the instructions, I probably would have known that, but basically I just scratched. Again, there was some, vents on it. Again, just used clapboard siding with the little strip styrene around the outside, and I scratch built the doors. It's really simple. It's just 4 walls with minimal doors on it. Like I say, that concrete block really looks realistic. And then built doors. Based on the photos, I could tell by the shadows that the door on this side was inset, where the door on the other side hung on the outside. And I didn't have a photo of this end, but I added personnel during a stairway, because having seen the other three sides, there had to be some way of people getting in and out of it. So I added that at one end. And so now we had this structure done. I actually did this on vacation, away from home, because I brought the supplies with me. It was something that was fairly easy to put together. So I got to the mill, and I remember the main thing was to just design a series of, boxes. And so in this case, because it was fairly large, I used fairly thick styrene and then very, thick styrene members as supports in the corners. But again, start off with the basic rectangle. You can see here a change. When I first laid it out on the drawings and then built it, the elevator seemed too short for me. So I went back, rechecked my calculations, and I was off by a few feet. So I extended things. But this was basically designed for what was the initial main structure with the elevator added. The foundation had a little concrete section because this is where they added the unloading area for the trucks. And then I added this section, which had been added over time, which was, right hanging right over the end. And this is the only part that really had many windows in the end. That was the easy part. The tough part was cutting all the individual sheets of Campbell corrugated siding and gluing them on. I used CA cement. I will say that I probably went through a fairly significant amount of not just the glue, but the glue remover to separate my fingertips from the materials, because when you put on that many individual sheets, you do get glue on your fingers. In the future, and since then, I've done some other things where I've used like a double back tape to hold it. So I'd probably do that and not, or the other thing I've been using a lot lately is canopy cement, because it's very flexible and it joins different materials. So if I were to do it again, I would definitely not use CA. But, quite a few days of cutting and gluing strips, but it does give you a very nice finish at the end. And then for the ribbed roofing, you can buy this stuff from Evergreen, but in that case, it's still solid. Whereas JTT sells rib roofing that actually is stamped into thin plastic, about 20 thousandths thick. And so when you look at the edge, you actually see the ribs, they're hollowed out. And so I use this for the roofs, and then just little styrene angles to cover the seams. I painted the windows ahead of time, installed them. Then I didn't install them right away, because the next step was to spray the walls with dull coat, because the weathering won't stick to the aluminum siding as it is. So cover with dull coat, started weathering, then added the windows so I didn't goof up the glass on the back of the windows. But this is all weathered with different shades of pan pastels. The beauty of pan pastels is you can, they're fairly forgiving. It's easy to mix them. And so just before the deadline, this is a panoramic view, but this is what Rockville looked like. I got all the key structures. I spent a little more time after this adding some more details and things to it. And I've actually been doing a little bit of work since. But I had it looking like this in time for the convention. So here's just kind of a few of the views. I was pretty happy with the way the street went on. This is actually a Walters building, a Walters house kit, a stock kit, but it was actually very accurate because on the backdrop behind it is the actual house that was there, and they look very similar. The house on this side was actually where the priest for the church lived, the rectory. And so I felt good about having some that kind of matched very well. It was pretty accurate. A couple other views. Just because of the depth of the sea, and the trestles should be probably another 12 inches back, but I just didn't have the room to put the right distance in there. You see, by this point, I'd already started adding some more details and weeds, things for the parked cars. This is one of the things that I realized was a problem. I built the building first, then once I put it in place, I realized this grain loading pipe was too low and too far down the door. So since that time, it's been rebuilt with the pipe going straight. So now it ends at about the right height at the top of the, near the top of the door. So what's left of it seems like this is never finished. Still have some more weathering to do, especially around the Deep Rock dealer. There's a Pennzoil sign. I have to look close in the photos. I need to add and finish the asphalt. I did fix the grain loading pipe. Some photos of the grain, I showed the mill showed another warehouse at the front. I haven't been able to find out yet if that was there in 56 or not. If it wasn't, I may need to do that. Adding awnings to the cabinet store. And then there's room for one more building. If we look here, there's still a spot right here on the street, which I just left the grass for now. Oh, yeah, I say add more details and across for the church. But the last thing would be build the general store and Hermes bar. And I found some really interesting photos. This was the largest building in town. And even in 78, it was still there. But in my time frame, Cold Spring was the next town over, and they had their own brewery. And there's some really nice signage on the bar and store. So, and this is 55. So right in my time period, there's even this great, nice advertising sign on the side of the building. So this is one of the things I want to add over time. With that, thank you. And are there any questions?
There was one comment in the chat that I saw. Actually, no, there's two now. I'm sorry. Your layout looks very good. You did a good job matching the scenery and the details. That's from Richard Robinstein. Andrew is wondering, what products do you use to simulate water?
That one was there. I used, forgot the company. It's called Magic Water. It's a 2-part resin. So you just basically mix it and pour it. What I want to go back to now is I've got some of the water effects to add a little bit of waves and turbulence in a few spots. It's a little too smooth, but yeah, I forgot the company, but they call the product Magic Water. You just mix it, pour it, and let it dry. I will say the difficulty with that is the resin tends to creep up the sides, so it tends to climb up higher than you want. So you want to pour the water, let it harden, and then put the scenery around the edges. Otherwise, it'll just get sucked up in the scenery and you'll have very shiny scenery and you'll be redoing it. I know that from doing it the hard way.
Ron Farrell adds, great work on adding so many details to Rockville. And I have to agree with that. It looks fantastic. But that's all we've got here so far. Okay. Else have any questions they want to add? Go ahead and just unmute yourself and pop them out for Rich.
Well, thank you very much, Rich. It's a wonderful presentation. I very much enjoyed it.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have about a 5-minute break. So you've got time to top up your coffee. And we will see you all back at 2 p.m.
Tom, this is Gary. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Let me stop the share. Okay,
Okay.
go ahead and share.
Okay, I'm going to click on the share screen button down in the bottom.
Yep.
And let's see here. I hope this is the one. Let's see here.
There we are.
Okay, and just make sure I have the right one here. Okay,
Main line to Wilmar.
okay. Okay, good. Looks like it works. So,
All right. So we have about 3 minutes. Let people finish topping up the coffees and
yep, no problem.
then we'll start.